Keeping It in the Family by 1Van30S0M3. Chapter 1, Weird Feelings. Lincoln forlornly lay on his bed, trying to read one of his Ace-savvy comics, despite having read the same panel 3 times. He had known that Clyde was going to be traveling the country with his family for the first few weeks of summer vacation, but it still didn't ease his depression. It was the first day of the break from school, but it felt like the worst time in his life. He finally gave up trying to finish the comic, opting instead to put it away. He threw on some clothes, choosing to make his way downstairs to see if the TV was free. Luna's music was blasting from the other side of her door, so he knew she was too busy. He started down the stairs only to see Lisa heading up, so she wasn't going to be a part of the brawl. He looked then into the kitchen after hitting the bottom to see that Luan was busy with making pies for jokes and routines. All he had to do was just avoid her and he was golden. A smile joined his face, only to leave when he directed his attention to the couch, noticing that Lynn was laying on it, enjoying some sport that was on. Lincoln sighed, making it his resolve to head back and try to read his comic again. Lynn heard him, only to turn her head before grabbing his attention. "Oh, hey, Lincoln," she greeted before inquiring further into his distress. "So what's wrong?" He turned back, a bit surprised that she was curious about his problems. Well, he gave, making his way to take a seat on the couch, Lynn adjusting so that he could have a seat. "It's just that Clyde is gone for a few weeks, so I've got nothing to really do." He lowered his head, letting it fall into his hands. She sat there listening, wondering. "Really," was all she gave in reply. She knew that Clyde was going away for a bit, but it never occurred to her that maybe it would have such a massive effect on her little brother. Lincoln didn't pick up on the slight tone change in her voice. "I'm sorry for bothering you during one of your games," he apologized, making for the trip back to his room. Lynn stopped him from getting off the couch. "No, it's okay, really," she said, leaving him to freeze over in shock. He looked at her to see if she was really serious, well, that or if he was suffering some sort of stroke, only to wonder ever further when she said, "In fact, you can pick the show." Had his ears deceived him? Lincoln stared at her, grabbing the remote to make sure that she wasn't just screwing with him. He then looked at the TV, slowly flipping through the channels, looking back at her occasionally to really see if she was going to stop him. He settled on RG, waiting for Lynn to just lose it and steal the remote back so that she could watch her game. Nothing. In fact, Lynn seemed to actually like watching what was on. Lincoln tried focusing on the program, but before he knew it, the credits started to roll and he just couldn't handle the queer atmosphere that was being generated. "Thanks for letting me watch my show, Lynn," he said before getting off the couch. A chill went down his spine as he heard "thanks for picking the show" Lincoln emanate from her mouth. No, something wasn't right. His sister never let someone change it from a game she was in the middle of watching, not without a fight. He turned to see that a smile was on her face, making the feeling of fear start to resonate even more within his gut. He decided that the best course of action was to head back to his bedroom before she could hurt him, if that was her plan. Lynn, on the other hand, was fighting a completely different set of emotions from those of her little brother. She had been trying to suppress some odd feelings that she had been having for him. She didn't know why, but for some reason weird feelings were emerging within her for her brother just a month or two prior to school letting out. She didn't know how to explain them, nor did she really know where to go to see who could explain them. Instead, she was focusing on the fact that her brother was leaving the couch, berating herself for scaring him. She tried to act as normal as possible, but that was easier said than done. She sighed internally before grabbing the remote to see if the game was still on. It still was, her team just barely winning. At least there was something to give her comfort for what had happened. Why do I feel this way for him? She thought over and over again, enough to keep her from enjoying the game. The buzzer rang and her team had won. She had a slight smile stretched onto her face, happy to see something good come from all of this. Her thoughts then returned to Lincoln, destroying the happiness she felt, remembering that she had scared him away with her attempts at being nicer to him. At least she could try to figure it all out a little later. Lincoln came down the stairs again, heading for the door. "Where are you headed off to?" she called from the couch. He looked at her before replying. "I'm off to the arcade," he responded, a form of cheer and happiness entering his voice. "Mind if I come as well?" she inquired. Lincoln's heart stopped. He had shock coursing through his body, trying to make sense of what his sister had said before all the processes reached the same conclusion that yes, she had indeed asked to come to the arcade with him. Sure, he told her, worried of her meeting Ronnie Ann. Hopefully she would keep herself occupied with some sport game while he enjoyed a little competition in a game with his girlfriend. They started walking together, making some small talk as they strolled. Lynn seemed a bit too invested in his interests, he noticed. He welcomed the thought that one of his sisters would take an interest in his hobbies, but this was the one who seemed to have a completely different set of interests from his. She was practically a mirror opposite to him. Still, something was gnawing at him as though things weren't as they seemed. They arrived not too long after their trip. I think they have some sort of hoop shot game in here," he told her in an attempt to get her to be distracted from him. He still didn't want his sisters to know of the relationship he had with Ronnie Ann, a feeling that was mutual with her. Lynn thanked her brother, looking around the arcade for something to catch her eye. The hoop shot game was in the back, just like he said, but she passed on it, looking for something a little closer to Lincoln. He was still waiting just outside the entrance, looking like he was waiting for someone. She started to play a game that allowed her a good view of him. She paid some attention to the game, trying to get a feel for the rail shooter, only to end up getting a game over the screen after failing to truly grasp the idea of the mechanics. She looked back to Lincoln, seeing him lower his head and start walking away. She rushed to his side. "What's wrong, Link?" she asked, trying to find the source of his broken feelings. "Oh, nothing," he replied, still walking away after having barely turned toward her. "We just barely got here," she lightly protested before an idea stuck itself into her head. "How about we enjoy a game or two before we leave?" He picked his head up, surprise somewhat visible on his face, before he started contemplating the idea. "I doubt you'll agree to anything I wish to play," he stated, nearly resuming his former posture. "And what makes you say that?" she countered. Immediately they stopped. He gave a look of disbelief. If it wasn't apparent before, it sure was now. "Well, I just figured you'd." "I'd what? Come on, there's a game I think you could help me with," she interrupted, hoping to get him to reconsider his decision. "All right, I guess," he replied, looking less gloomy as he went back, Lynn following him. They began getting into the rail shooter she had chosen, enjoying some time together. His mood seemed to be picking up as he blasted through some enemies, Lynn doing the same. "So who were you to meet today?" she struck up, trying to see who it was. "Well, I can't," Lincoln said, with a slight blush coming to his face. "And just why not?" she asked, a bit of wonder creeping into her voice. "Because you'll tell the family," he stated truthfully, getting hit by one of the enemies. "I am appalled by such an accusation against my dear name," she exclaimed softly, playfulness coating the tone. All right, but only if you promise not to tell anyone else," he forced out, attempting to get some sort of assurance to keep it a secret. "I promise on my name is allowed," she said with fake seriousness. He chuckled a little before he resumed. "I was supposed to meet Ronnie Ann today, but she was unable to make it," he explained, taking another hit from a lucky enemy. What was all that Lynn could manage, allowing an enemy to relentlessly take her health? A countdown began. He started before being rudely interrupted by another lucky attack from an enemy, leaving him at a countdown screen. Want to keep going or call it quits? "I think you've spent enough on me," she replied, seeing the counter hit 0. "So what were you saying?" "Oh, I was just saying that I was supposed to meet with Ronnie Ann today, but she had other obligations," he explained as they got to the score chart to enter a name. "What do you want to put?" "How about LLL?" she told him. Works for me, he said as he pointed at that letter. They had achieved the highest score on the leaderboard. Must be a fresh game, he muttered to himself. So yeah, that's why I came here. Lynn looked at him, her heart seeming to sink when hearing him talk of another girl in his life. They began to make their way home, the sun a bit lower in the sky. So, why were you meeting her? Lynn forced the question, knowing what the answer might be. Lincoln began to fidget a little. Well, because it was date, he said after struggling to find the right words. Lynn took the words as a nail being pounded into her heart. Oh was all she managed, trying to keep the sadness out of her voice. The walk home seemed to consist of silence with bits of conversation moving between them. They entered the door, their hearing assaulted by the chaos of the home. Lincoln turned to Lynn. Thanks for coming to the arcade with me, he told her, an unaware grin appearing, not realizing that he was banging at the nail in her heart with a verbal hammer. You're welcome. Thanks for taking me, she replied, trying to put on a mask of happiness. He headed up the stairs, presumably to his room. She checked if anyone was watching TV, spotting Lola and Lana enjoying some Blarney. Without any other option to keep her truly occupied, save for some sport activity, she went up to her shared room. She buried her head in a pillow, hoping to drown out her sorrows by being alone with her thoughts, praying they would reach something sporty and away from Lincoln. What's wrong? A voice sprang from nowhere. I don't want to talk about it, Lucy, she replied, too busy wallowing in her depression and pillow to have been scared by her sister's sudden appearance. You know the problem won't go away if you don't talk about it, Lucy said, hoping to get an answer. It won't go away if I do talk about it, she retorted, her face no longer buried and staring at Lucy. Let me rephrase, I won't go away until you tell me, Lucy delivered. Lynn, with the ultimatum forced onto her, sighed before explaining, sitting up to face her sister. All right, fine, she started. I don't know why, but I think I love our brother, she explained, trying to find the right words to accurately describe it without being blunt, meeting with bluntness instead. Lucy just stared silently, Lynn unable to see what was going on behind her eyes. You're messing with me, aren't you? Was Lucy's response. I'm not, Lynn reiterated, trying to get the seriousness drilled into her sister's head. You really are serious, Lucy gasped. Lynn had her face buried in her hands, a blush of embarrassment coming on, waiting for the insults to start coming her way. You have to tell him Lynn was surprised by this reaction, moving her hand so that she could look at her sister. I can't, she countered, knowing full well of the consequences that might ensue from her gesture. She couldn't stand the thought of never seeing her brother if he rejected her for pouring her heart out to him. Then would come the family, next society. No, this wasn't an option. You must. It'll only get worse if you don't do anything, Lucy opined, her voice changing slightly from deadpan. This is just when Edwin. No, wait, that was a different series. Point is, you can't not tell him. Lynn thought this over before giving a reply. And what of the good book, huh? It says that this is wrong, she countered, remembering when they used to attend church before the family got too big to contain the rowdiness, instead being left to study the Bible on Sundays in observance. Then do something, because you might end up doing something worse than this, Lucy responded, backing off on the subject. Lynn then noticed Lucy had disappeared again, leaving her alone with her thoughts. She laid back down onto her bed, covering her face with her hands once more. Which hell is worse? Lynn wondered to herself. Lincoln had resumed his attempt at finishing his comic, turning the last page. All he could think about was the way his sister had been acting, so much so that he couldn't really recall the last few pages of the comic he just finished. He sighed, putting the item away, starting to really think about and recall the behavior she had been exhibiting prior to today. She seemed different, though it had been so subtle that today was the first time he really noticed the queer behavior. For the past 2 weeks, he hadn't been surprised grappled by her. Then there was the lack of contact sports for a bit longer than that. Finally, he noticed the lack of involvement he had with sports in which he'd played against her for at least a month. Maybe he could talk to her about it after dinner. A note slid under his door, removing him from his thoughts. He picked it up and unfolded it to see what the paper held in its clutches. It reads someone close has feelings for you. He couldn't tell who wrote it, though he was able to recognize all his sister's styles of writing. This one seemed like it was purposely altered, trying to hide their identity. Maybe he could talk with Lisa or even Lynn to see who wrote it. Lynn was poking her food with her fork, having only eaten half of it. Everyone around her had finished their plates. Her mother soon noticed and spoke up. "What's wrong, honey?" she asked of her lovelorn daughter.
What?
"Oh, it's just," she led, trying to think of something decent. She didn't want to lie, especially to her mother, but telling your parents that you love a sibling as more than a sibling just isn't what you want to say if you wish to keep a straight jacket off of you, or worse yet, if you don't wish to drive them away with your life choices. Still, the decisions were there, weighing heavily on her mind. "My team lost their game today," she lied, hoping that her parents would buy it. "Oh, well, sorry then," her mother responded, apparently buying it. She even assumed that it was a championship game from the way her daughter acted. Lincoln, on the other hand, was dealing with a separate problem. He was considering asking Lisa for help with the identity of the one who wrote the note he received, but chose against it. She seemed to be wrapped up in some sort of study involving Lily. Still, he barely finished his plate when a voice asked something of him. What he replied, unable to discern who it was that asked him or even what it was. I said, "Is everything all right?" Lana questioned. He wanted to say that something was bothering him, but the explanation of the item at the top of the list was something he didn't want to go through, so he went with item number 2. "Yeah, it's that Clyde is away for a while, so I really have nothing to occupy myself with," he answered, hoping it would keep his younger sisters from prying too deep. "Well, if you need to ever know how to win a beauty pageant, then I can help," Lola offered. "Yeah, and I might need some help building the perfect mud pie. If you're interested," Lana proffered, both trying to help their older brother through his rut. Lisa was too busy with her study to offer help, Lily too young to really give him anything to help soothe her older brother's woes. Lucy stayed silent, knowing what the problem was that sat at the top of her older brother's mind. Lynn walked into the kitchen to store her dinner in the fridge, passing by the kid table that was the eating place of her younger brother. She blushed lightly upon seeing him, though it helped her speed across the room so as to get out quickly. Lincoln saw that she had moved faster after seeing him, but not the blush that gave her the burst of speed. He moved to set his dishes at the sink, finding that Lynn moved even faster to leave the room. Curiouser and curiouser, he muttered to himself, vaguely remembering the famous line. Lincoln headed straight into his room, trying to decipher the meaning of the message. Something wasn't right. No, this was trouble in paradise. He sat, playing the events of the day in his head, hoping to see what he was missing. A knock came at his door, removing him from his internal devices. "Come in," he instructed, seeing that it was Lynn at his door as she entered the former linen closet. "Need something?" he asked, wondering what her visit was about. "I need to tell you something," she replied. Lucy's words were stuck in her mind, constantly telling her to tell her brother of her feelings. She felt knots twisting and playing havoc in her stomach, nearly crippling her. She looked at him, seeing that he was all ears. The concern on his face was what was getting to her. She had double-checked to make sure the door was shut before entertaining the thought of continuing. I can't do this," she cried before leaving his room, tears begging at the doors that were her eyes. She bolted to her shared room, closing the door before leaning on it, only to slide to the floor, her back still pressed against it. Lucy would just have to enter through one of the vents, she thought in the deep recesses of her mind. Her face was buried in her knees as she began to cry, trying to keep it as soft as possible so as to lessen the involvement of her other siblings. Lincoln sat there speechless. He had never seen his older sister cry before. He really wondered what it was that she wanted to tell him. Then he began to remember the note that was under his door, wondering if that was somehow a part of all of this. Still, he hated to see one of his siblings under such duress, always wanting to fix the problem so that they could return to their normal self. He got up, making his way to Lynn and Lucy's room, hoping to see what it was that was causing havoc with her emotions. He knocked. Nothing. He knocked once more. Go away was all he got from Lynn. It's me, Lincoln, he informed her, hoping she would let him in. He heard someone getting off the floor and door before he was greeted by the sight of a crying Lynn. She ushered him in, closing the door. What do you need? She asked after turning back to him. Her eyes were all puffy and red from the crying she had done. I came in to see what the problem was, he said, stating the reason for his visit rather bluntly. She should have known that he would come in and try to console her, yet it slipped from her mind, forcing her to have to tell him what it was she meant to tell him in his room. You wouldn't understand if I told you, she said, trying to come off as cold, but failing spectacularly. Then I'll wait until I do understand, he told her calmly. Tears threatened to break across her eyes once more. She leaned against the door, going straight to the ground. She wanted to bury her face into her knees, but he came over to join her. After plopping down on her right side, he wrapped his left arm around her neck, trying to bring her into a hug of sorts. Instead, she kept her face tucked away behind her hands, crying as she went into his chest. He waited until she stopped crying so that he could see what the problem was, oblivious to the fact that he lay at the center of it all. Finally, the tears stopped flowing and she began to compose herself, moving from his chest, though not throwing his arm from around her, bringing her knees to her own chest. Are you ready to tell me what's bothering you? He asked in concern. She merely nodded before responding. The problem is she struggled to say it, the words themselves refusing to leave of their own volition. I think I love you. Well, I love you too, Lynn Lincoln said, missing what she meant. No, not like that at all. I mean, I love you more than as a brother to me, she said, hoping that he understood what she was saying. Like as in you love me like a friend, Lincoln said, the shock in his voice growing as he hoped that was what she meant, though he was beginning to reach a conclusion that seemed to match Lynn's very meaning. No, I mean, I love you more than a sister, she said, turning toward him, the next series of words hitting Lincoln slowly. I love you as someone would for someone that isn't related to them. Lincoln went white from hearing this. He wanted to faint, wanted to be sure this was all some sort of strange dream he could wake from. Lynn saw this and looked ready to cry again. Please say something, she choked, trying to keep from having her tears fall once more. I don't know how to respond, he managed, stunned at the revelation. I knew it. I just knew you would think less of me, Lynn accused, tears beginning to flow. He simply pulled her back to him. I don't think any less of you, he said calmly, having regained some of his senses. She stopped crying, shocked at what he had said. He continued with his line of thought. I really don't know what to think, but I don't think any less of you. His words held comfort to them, even if it was a little. He rubbed his forehead and eyes with his free hand. I really don't know what to think or say, but I don't think any less of you. That much is true. She hugged him, glad to know that he still loved her, even if it was just as a sister, though a thought raced through her mind, causing her to panic. Please don't tell Mom and Dad or any one of our sisters, please, she begged, the very idea causing her to panic so. Don't worry, I won't say a thing to them, he reassured, trying to make sure she was going to calm down. He wasn't even sure if he should tell them or not. He then figured that he might have to think on the revelation. Still, nothing was normal about this. He started thinking back to the good book and what it said about this very thing, but even so, he still didn't know what to do with the items presented before him tonight. Chapter 2, Change in the House of Louds. Lincoln slept in his room, tossing and turning. He couldn't quit replaying the conversation he had with Lynn earlier. After she had told him that she loved him, he had his whole world ripped apart, trying to piece itself back together with the new insight. At least he could try to figure out how best to handle things from here. After all, he was the man with the plan. Morning came too soon, leaving him with some minor sleep deprivation. He made his way downstairs after checking that it was 8 in the morning. Yawning, he descended the steps, going into the kitchen to grab some breakfast. He noticed Lori grabbing some coffee, possibly to go see Bobby at his new job. "Morning," he said with a yawn, attacking the end of the greeting. "Morning," she replied before turning around. "You look like you've seen hell he really might have for all he knew. He even thought that he would see it in person, that is if he saw Lynn on the way down." He grabbed some cereal, pouring a bowl for himself. "Off to see Bobby?" he asked, too tired to really care about the answer. "Yes, he started a brand new job as a limo driver, so I'm off to congratulate him," she said, not noticing that he was too busy eating his cereal. "Anyways, see you later," she said on her way out the front door. Bye, he called out, nearly ready to plant his face into his breakfast. He took the time to sit at the adult table before the rest of his family got up. He then saw Lynn making her way down the stairs as he got up to return his bowl to the sink. "Morning," he greeted her, the thought of last night still fresh in his mind, creating an awkward atmosphere. "Morning," she greeted back, still having the night before going through her mind. She couldn't look at him, not after all that transpired. He rinsed his bowl, setting it so that it would be washed by whomever's turn it was. He tried to leave the kitchen, only to be stopped by Lynn's voice. "Listen, Link, I'm sorry." "No, Lynn," he stopped her before she could continue any further. She had stopped rummaging in the fridge, giving him her full attention. He pressed on. "You have nothing to apologize to me for, so please, no." She seemed to understand what he said, going back to rummaging in the fridge. He made his way to his bedroom, making sure to get fully prepped for the day. Lynn was still in her nightwear, though she herself had insomnia over the whole ordeal. She simply reheated her dinner, enjoying it as best she could before anyone else got up. She went back to her room after finishing the dinner. Maybe she would make the attempt at rest again. She crawled back into bed, closing her eyes. "How'd your talk go?" Lucy asked from right beside her bedside. "Go," she nearly let off an expletive before catching herself. "What is it, Lucy?" she asked, too focused on the apparition of her roommate for sleep to come. "How'd your talk with Lincoln go?" she repeated with a slight expansion to her original question. "I'd rather not talk about it," Lucy replied, trying to go to sleep. "You can tell me now, or you can tell me later," Lucy told her. "I could always tell you never," Lynn threatened, trying to drown her sister from her ears. "Then maybe Lincoln tell me," Lucy stated, moving to make her way to her brother's bedroom. "Wait," Lynn called, stopping her sister from leaving. "I told him and I don't know," she struggled, "but he doesn't think any less of me." At least Lucy seemed to smile, though Lynn couldn't tell with that face of hers she always kept. "All right, well, I'm going to take a shower before anyone else does with that." Lucy left, leaving Lynn to ponder if she made the right choice. Lucy decided to make a small stop on her way to the bathroom. She'd visit her older brother before nabbing the coveted room. "Hey, Lincoln," she greeted, sending her brother into the air. "Lucy," he scolded, trying to calm down from the fright he had just received. There was no doubt in his mind that if he'd been sleepy before, then he was wide awake now. "Sorry, I just came in to see how Lynn's talk went last night," she explained for her stop. "Well, that makes one of us, because I told her I wouldn't tell anyone about it," he said, wishing to be respectful of his sister's wishes and privacy. "She knows that I know of its contents," Lucy admitted, trying to pry further. "Well, unless she tells me personally," I'm not saying a word. He dug even further in. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a shower to take," he told her, making his way to the bathroom. Lucy didn't bother arguing for the shower, opting to enjoy breakfast instead. Well, enjoy it the way she usually experienced joy. Lincoln stepped out of the bathroom, only to see Lynn waiting in line for her turn. They exchanged a few awkward words and glances before he hurried on his merry way to his bedroom, getting ready for the day. He got dressed, leaving the house as the rest of the siblings rose from their slumber. He had somewhere to be this morning. Lincoln met with Ronnie Ann in one of the parks he usually visited. She started to apologize for not making it the day before due to some family stuff popping up, but that she could go today if he should so wish. You like my sisters, right? He asked, trying to get a feel for what he wanted to say. She thought for a moment before handing him her answer. I guess so, she said, remembering how few her interactions with his family were. It's just, can I ask you something, Ronnie Ann? He inquired, stopping from their stroll and changing the subject, not sure if he really should continue with what he wanted to say. Sure, she replied, stopping with him, curious as to what he wanted to ask. I really want to know your opinion so that I can choose how to proceed, he stalled. Okay, I'll try to help, she said, hoping it wasn't something frivolous. I really don't know any other way of saying this, he further stalled, trying to steer from his course, only to find he was stuck taking it. How do I? One of my sisters seems to have developed feelings for me, he finally released, glad that no one else was at the park. Ronnie Ann just stared before laughing heartily. Oh man, you got me, lame-o, you got me. All right, let's go, she said, still chuckling to herself, continuing their walk. I'm serious, he said, having not moved from when he stopped. Come on, it was funny once, but not the second time around, she said, turning to face him. He simply kept his face, looking at her with as much seriousness as he could muster. You're joking, right? She tried to read his face, but it wasn't joking. For the love of God, please tell me you're joking. She began to realize that he was far from joking, her face beginning to contort. If only, Ronnie Ann, if only was his answer to her request. Who is it? She asked, jealousy creeping in. I'm not going to tell you, he told her, trying his damnedest to keep his sister safe from Ronnie Ann's inevitable wrath. Lincoln, you're going to tell me who this freak of nature is, she demanded of him, ready to start threatening. No, I'm not, and you're going to pick a better choice of words when you talk about my family, he told her. He knew this was going to escalate quickly, though he had little control of any of the conversation anymore. Why? Why won't you tell me, she interrogated, hoping to reach a conclusion. Because I don't think it'd be wise in case you started blabbing to others when you take out your anger on her, he told her, hoping that she wouldn't continue any farther down her line of thought. You love her too, don't you? Ronnie Ann seemed to whisper, jumping to a conclusion that wasn't meant to be implied nor was based in reality. Ronnie Ann, he started. That's sick, she yelled, making a disgusted face. Ronnie Ann, please keep this quiet, Lincoln calmly said, anger beginning to show through his tone. And just why? Just give me one reason why I should keep quiet about this, huh? She argued, the venom already primed. Because rug munching used to be considered just as bad, he countered, fury coating the words and tone of voice that uttered them. Ronnie Ann looked hurt, almost as if he had beaten her with his bare hands. How dare you, she tried to fight back. How dare I, how dare I, how dare you? You're the one jumping to baseless conclusions and degrading my family with your words, he fought back, continuing his tirade, and yet you stand here accusing me of being the one that's a monster. I told you that in confidence, she claimed, her emotional state shattered, though it was taking forever to begin its toll. And I told you so that I could seek an opinion on how to resolve my situation, he ranted, driving in every word like a nail. Now I know your opinion and I don't want any part of it, his next words finally gunned down her heart. I've seen the real you and I don't like her. Goodbye, Ronnie Ann, and like that, he turned to walk away, heading for home. Don't you dare walk away from me, loud, she called, hoping to get some sort of response. He paid no mind, acting like she was nothing but air. She had fallen to her knees, unable to believe the exchange of words they had. His words had stung her with venom. I told you that in confidence, she whispered to herself, tears damming up, thoughts turning to Bobby to get her from the place she was wounded at. Lincoln walked into his home, ignoring the chaos like it was deafening silence. He went into his room, not bothering to close the door. He lay on the bed face down in his pillow, letting sleep take him from the world in which he had broken up with his girlfriend, the world in which his sister loved him in a more than sisterly fashion, the world that just seemed to be broken and upside down. Lynn had been practicing some of her sports in the backyard, trying to keep herself from thinking about the talk she had with her brother. It had been a couple of hours, so she called it and went in to freshen up for whatever else might be a part of her day. She saw that her brother's door was open and grew curious about what he was up to. She walked to his doorway, peering in to find that he was face down in his pillow. "Hey, Lincoln, you up?" she gently called from her position. He started to stir, raising his head up, leaving a wet spot in the pillow. His eyes were red, though sleep seemed to be playing something of a role in his expression. "Yeah, I'm up." "Why?" he questioned, stretching while moving to sit on his bed. "Were you crying?" she asked, her voice becoming concerned for her brother. "What?" "No," he queried, looking to his pillow, which contradicted his stance. "At least I don't think I was," he said, figuring the tears came during his nap. Lynn moved into his room, closing the door behind her. "What's the matter, Link?" she grilled, worried that her brother was suffering from something atrocious. "I got into a fight with Ronnie Ann and we broke up," he admitted, though it was surprising that he almost didn't care for it. "At any rate, the tears I shed would be better suited for the dam than for her," he claimed, leaving his sister shocked. "Why would you say such things?" she asked, trying to wrap her head around his attitude toward it all. "Because she attacked you verbally and I wouldn't stand for it," he reasoned, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. She still didn't understand it all, but at least it didn't seem to be affecting him that badly. "Well, if you ever need anything, then I'm here for you," she told him, hoping that he would have her help him if he needed it. "Well, I think I need you to move out of the way, 'cause here comes Lori," he warned. Lynn moved out of the room, and sure enough, Lori was charging down the hallway, looking as if she were on the warpath. "What is wrong with you, Lincoln?" she blasted, nearly to the point of becoming physical in her approach. He simply stood up and began tending to his clothes, straightening them as he spoke. "If it has to deal with Bobby or Ronnie Ann, then I don't want to hear it," he calmly told his oldest sister. Her rage just seemed to multiply with that sentence alone. Before she could respond, he continued, "Besides, I have somewhere to go," and he made his way past Lori. She looked to the point of strangling him with his own intestines before just giving up to cry, running to her shared room. Lincoln merely turned to Lynn. "Want to take a stroll with me?" he asked. "Sure," she replied, wondering what it was all about, wondering if this was the result of his breakup. They headed toward the door when Leanie, who was enjoying some fashion magazine on the couch, stopped them with a simple question. "Where are you two heading?" "Nowhere," her younger brother told her, continuing like nothing was happening. He held the door open for Lynn, closing it behind her. "I wonder where that is," she thought to herself before returning to her magazine. "Where are we going, Link?" Lynn asked, hoping to see where they would go, despite the answer he gave to their older sister. "Wherever my legs take us," he responded. They began walking, stopping when they hit a corner. Lincoln simply dropped to his knees, his expression of carelessness being replaced by all sorts of emotions, each fighting with one another for control of his face. Lynn knelt down next to him. "I don't get it, Lynn," he told her. "What? What's wrong, Lincoln?" Lynn asked, worrying if he was going to break down. "I defended you, and yet I feel like I'm the monster," he said, his tone just sounding as if it were staring into space, on the verge of destroying itself. Lynn worked quickly, trying to think of something to say to help comfort him. "Come on, don't say that. Come on," she said, praying that would work in snapping him out of his daze, grabbing his right hand to help give her attempt at comfort some weight. "Why?" "It's true," he said, stepping further into that void. No, it's not," she told him, struggling to make sure he didn't just give up on his emotions and the world around him. Something began to stir behind his eyes. She let go of his hand. "I know where we're going now," he informed her, his tone starting to return to normal. "Alrighty then, let's go," she encouraged him. She didn't know where they were going, but hoped that it might be someplace to help him cope better. She stood up, extending her hand to help her brother up. He took it, standing back up. As they began to walk, they continued holding hands. They finally reached a house. He let go of his sister's hand, knocking on the door. It opened, revealing Ronnie Ann as the greeter. "What do you want, lame-o?" she interrogated, still upset over the events that had happened earlier. She appeared to have been crying, though a scowl had replaced the feeling of sadness on her face. "Is Bobby here?" Lincoln asked, wishing to see him in order to straighten things out with Lori. "No, he's still at his job," she explained. "Well, I guess this is it then," he muttered to himself before getting to the meat of his visit. "I've simply come over so that I could apologize for my earlier actions, but I also came over to make sure my sister would receive an apology for your actions. So for what it's worth, I'm sorry." Ronnie Ann stood there the whole time, seemingly able to pierce his very soul with her scowl until he mentioned his sister. Then her eyes widened, changing her entire expression. She waited for him to finish before looking between the two, shock having hit her face like a bat. "This is the sister," was all she managed before hitting the ground, having fainted from the revelation that this was the one who had feelings for him. Lincoln tried to save her from the fall, failing to reach her in time. Lynn started checking if Ronnie Ann was all right, coming to the conclusion that it was just a faint. She was thankful for all those years in sports teaching her how to check for injuries. "Help me get her upstairs," he told Lynn, grabbing the unconscious girl's feet. They managed to get her to her room, setting her gently on the bed. "I'm going to leave a note," he said, immediately searching for a pencil and some paper. Lynn couldn't help but worry about what might have happened had she kept her feelings to herself, wondering if Ronnie Ann would somehow feel like Lincoln was stolen by her. After all was said and done, they made their way home, holding hands the whole while. They entered the front door, removing their physical contact from each other. Both headed up the stairs, ending up outside of Lincoln's room. "Thanks for doing that," Lynn said, a smile lining her face, happy that he wanted to right any wrongs, regardless of all involved. He smiled too, though a bit weaker than her. "Please, it was the least I could do," he replied before noticing that Lori was still grieving over the breakup she had with Bobby. He guessed Ronnie Ann still had yet to see the note. Well, that or she didn't follow through with his request. There was also the chance that Bobby had yet to return home. "Well, since this ugly piece of business is out of the way, I guess I'd better leave you to your own devices," she told him before heading into her room. One moment, real quick, he squeezed in before following Lynn into her bedroom. Lucy wasn't around, at least from what they could see. He made sure the door was shut before he continued with what he wanted to say. "Remember when I told you that I didn't think any less of you?" he asked. She nodded and he continued. "Well, I think that we should go someplace nice tomorrow. What do you say?" Lynn was taken aback by the offer. "Why, yes, sure, I think that would be nice," she stuttered, pleasantly surprised by the offer. "All right, I guess I'll see you then," he told her, turning around to leave, only to stop when Lynn grabbed his shoulder. He turned to see what she wanted, but was met with a kiss from his older sister. It was filled with passion, feeling deep with love. They finally broke from the kiss, panting heavily from how deep it had gone. Their smiles widened, happy with the end result. He continued out the door, happier than he had ever felt before, blissfully ignorant of someone keeping an eye on the two of them. Ronnie Ann had woken up from her faint, searching around to see where she was at. She noticed that she was in her bedroom, a note addressed to her left on the nightstand beside the bed. She began reading it. It read, "Dear Ronnie Ann, I came and apologized for my actions, expecting one from my sister Lynn for your actions. I am deeply sorry for hurting you, but I don't see us ever getting back together. I can only ask that you tell your brother to stay with Lori, despite what bad blood may be between us. Please understand all that I say and do. Lincoln." She stared at it, rereading it again and again and again. She still didn't like the idea of him being with one of his sisters, much less anyone other than her, but there was nothing she could do to change his mind. She began to question her reaction to his news, wondering if it was the best choice of wording to speak to him with in terms of what he wanted to say. He did explain, after all, that he wanted to see how to go about the idea of his sister's love with him for a happy end to it all, rather than entertain the thought of cheating on her. Still, she found it harder to accept that he had used her secret against her. She remembered him yelling out that she liked to play for both teams and reminding her of how it used to be when something like that was considered awful, if not as bad as what he began talking about. She wanted to take back the past, to choose a different path with her words. Nothing could fix that now. He still wouldn't go out with her. Even if she did apologize for all that was said, her feelings started to rise again, mixing over and over, not able to decide what they wanted to become. She heard the front door open and her brother call out that he was home. She headed downstairs. "Hey, Bobby," she said, sadness taking over her voice. "Hey, how's my favorite sister?" he asked in a cheery voice, trying to lift her spirits up. "I'm your only sister," she responded, a minor smile making itself join her face only to be ripped off soon thereafter. "I know, but that doesn't make my statement any less true, does it?" he told her, trying to lift her spirits once more. "All right, you've made your point, but I do want to ask you to do something for me," she told him, hoping that he would do it without question. "Sure thing, sis," he said, oblivious to what she was going to ask. "Well, I need you to stay together with Lori," she said, hoping for him to say yes. "Are you sure, especially after what Lincoln did to you?" he asked, wondering why she had made this request. "Lori shouldn't have to suffer for Lincoln's actions," she started, still seeing her brother holding a concerned look. "Plus, I don't want to deprive you of your happiness," she finished, hoping it would satisfy her brother. "Well, if you're sure about this," he said, wondering if she would be truly happy with it. Ronnie Ann nodded, letting him know that she was okay with it. He went out of the room, letting her know that he would be right back after making a call. She watched him leave and headed back to her bedroom. She started to let tears fall, not caring for anything else in the world. She always put on a tough act, but all that stress and pain had to be let out sometime. She just felt like she lost a large part of her world when Lincoln left, almost as if a piece of her soul was taken with him. She kept thinking about it all, hoping that nothing else would happen to her to wreak further havoc with her emotions. Then something clicked in her head. Maybe if she went over to his house tomorrow, she could apologize for her talking ill of his sister. Maybe that would send the idea that she wanted to be a part of his life, even if it was never back to a dating kind of relationship. Yeah, that seemed to help with her tears, waiting for tomorrow. Lincoln lay on his bed, wondering to himself, exploring all of that which happened across the day. He wondered if he had guaranteed his entrance into hell, worrying that he might hurt Lynn unintentionally since he didn't seem to reciprocate her feelings in their entirety. He figured the feelings would come in time, but when? He couldn't stand that she was so sad when she thought he hated her for her feelings. But he couldn't just lead her on. Maybe he was too emotionally destroyed to really think or feel anything about it all. He sighed, hoping he would never hurt his sister. Luan was looking over her cameras, looking more specifically at the one that had caught Lynn and Lincoln kissing. That bitch, she thought to herself. She couldn't believe that Lynn was putting the moves on their younger brother. Although neither one told the other about it, they each held feelings for him. Now, Luan knew that she had competition to vie for his heart, especially with Ronnie Ann out of the way. She began to plot out elaborate pranks against her sister, scrapping them all. No, revenge was a dish best served cold, so that's how she would go about it. Immediately, Machiavellian thoughts started racing into her mind, a Cheshire smile dancing across her lips. This was going to be fun. Chapter 3, La Principessa. Lincoln was startled awake, having risen from a nightmare. He sat up, sweating, trying to recall what was a part of the dream that removed him from his rest. He could only remember that Lynn was being held hostage by Ronnie Ann, drowning with Ronnie Ann holding Lynn's head in a tub under some sort of liquid. She simply turned to Lincoln, bound to a chair and unable to help his sister, telling him with glee your love is killing her, Lincoln. Before laughing maniacally, he couldn't move, even scream. His voice was simply lost to a vacuum, arms bound by rope. He watched his sister die right in front of him. It didn't help him any in knowing it was all in his sleep, but he wanted it to. "You okay?" a voice asked him. He turned to see it belonging to Lynn, standing in his doorway. He moved to get out of his bed, sweeping her into a hug. He closed his eyes, taking in the scent of her hair. Her concern grew exponentially. "Lincoln, what's wrong?" she queried, the panic starting to take root in her voice. "Nothing," he lied, trying to take his mind from the nightmare. He broke the embrace, stepping back to allow some breathing room for them both, only to then get a question to jump into his mind. "What are you doing in my room?" She looked a little sheepish before admitting the reason. "I came in because I heard some screaming," she said, trying to hide her concern to the best of her abilities. She knew that the others would have heard him as well, making their way to check on him. He peeked at his clock, noticing it was 7:30. His day just had to begin so early, didn't it? Right on cue, his sisters began filing out of their rooms along with their roommates. They began doting on him, driving it to a point where he had to force them from his room. Each one made their way to a different part of the house, choosing different ways to start the day. Lynn was the last to leave, making sure Lincoln was all right. Someone snuck into the shower, leaving Lynn to line up for her turn. PSST, a voice called. Lynn turned around, trying to see who it was trying to get her attention. "Hey, over here," the voice called again. Lynn saw that it was Luan, her head poking out of her in Luna's room. Lynn made her way over, both cautious and wondering why Luan was calling her over. She was grabbed by her arm and thrown in, receiving a jolt from one of Luan's hands. "Oops, I guess I forgot about the buzzer in my hand. Seems like you were shocked to find it," she said, leaving Lynn to groan at the awfulness of the joke. "Luan, it's too early to torture me right now," Lynn informed her, trying to get her to talk about why she wanted to speak to her. "What, can't I spend a little time with my younger sister?" she responded, braces gleaming in the poor light of the day creeping through the windows. "Well," Lynn started. "Oh, come on," Luan begged. All right, she admitted in defeat. "So why did you want me?" She cut to the point. Luan seemed to get a grin across her face. "Well, it's just that I noticed the way you and Lincoln were hugging each other last night," she began, leaving Lynn to get wide-eyed, paleness setting itself into her face. Luan continued, pretending not to notice. "I just figured that maybe there was something going on behind the scenes." Lynn just couldn't help but stare and worry, hoping that she wasn't caught in her love for Lincoln. "What makes you say that?" she asked, praying she hadn't been caught. A lump began forming in her throat. "I guess you could say that I have an eye in the sky," Luan informed her sister, laughing shortly thereafter. Lynn knew she wouldn't just laugh for no reason, knowing that she would do so after a joke of some sort. Oh no, fear pumped ever more into her system, waiting to react to whatever came her way. Luan paid no mind. "I mention this simply because I want you to show Lincoln a good time," she said, tipping Lynn off to the knowledge of their date today. Lynn was unaware of the motivation behind her words, not knowing of the plan that was at work. You see, the best way to cheer him up is to make sure he goes to Jean Juan's French Mex, Luan fed Lynn. Lynn started to think about it, and the more she thought, the more she liked it. It seemed odd to her that Luan was okay with what she was doing with her brother, though she still didn't want to risk the rest of her family knowing about it. "Thanks for the idea, Luan," Lynn told her sister. Luan just laughed in her own mind, knowing of the dominoes she just pushed over. Lynn left, making sure she went back to hold her spot in line for the bathroom. Luan shut the door behind her sister and pulled out a book from her dresser. "Oh, Niccolo, if only you had lived later so I could meet you in real life," she talked to the book. She thought it was bland, being nothing more than simply a guidebook for taking over countries, but found that it was worth reading in case she ever needed to remove competition. She then placed the book back in her dresser, making sure her clothes were hiding it. Lincoln sat on his bed, trying to find reason in the insanity that was becoming his life. He had broken up with Ronnie Ann after the things she had accused of him. Destroying the name that was his kin, he had apologized for using something of hers against her. He worried that she would try and hurt him, or worse yet, his sister. He kept wondering how to feel about it all. He hadn't shown any real emotion or care until it just hit him, slamming into him with a weight that felt like a pallet of bricks. He wanted to feel sad, but he couldn't, and now that he could, he didn't want to. He sighed, getting off the bed and dressing for the day. It would take forever for a shower, so he might as well kill time while waiting. He had just thrown on his clothes, ready to greet the day when he heard the doorbell go off. He raced there, seeing who it was. He threw open the door, revealing that it was Ronnie Ann on the other side. Whatever semblance of a smile was on his face before left, leaving something in the way of surprise to take its place. He left the house to venture to the front step, making sure that no others could hear or see him. "What are you doing here?" he asked, making some attempt at being cold, though success wasn't in his favor. He began to think about his nightmare, but pushed it to the pits of his mind. "I came over to apologize to you and your sister," she told him, the wounds and shock still fresh from the day before. He seemed to be glad about this, knowing that she had the heart and decency to make for a better today by owning up to her actions. "Thank you, though I am going to ask you to wait here while I grab Lynn." Just like that, he disappeared inside, questing to get Lynn. He approached her room first, hoping to find her. He knocked, listening for someone to answer him. He knocked again, getting an answer from the one he sought. "Come in," she instructed him, not knowing who was on the other side of the door. She was in the middle of tying her hair back into a ponytail, without much on besides her undergarments. He walked in, taking in the sight before him, before turning a shade of red no one would think possible. He averted his eyes to the ground, too embarrassed to speak. She had the luxury of changing in locker rooms for a good portion of her life, destroying a lot of the embarrassment that she would have felt. It still did nothing to hide what little red reached her face. "Need something?" she asked, the blush having touched her voice a tad. "I came in to tell you that Ronnie Ann is here and wants to say sorry," he spoke, his voice constantly changing because of the sight he beheld prior to his aversion. He thought that she looked cute in the pick of underwear she chose. "Oh," she managed before getting her hair done and struggling with her shirt. She then threw her shorts on as quickly as humanly possible. "You can look now," she informed him. He was still too afraid to move his eyes from the ground, choosing to ignore his sister's words. "Look, I've got shorts on," she told him, hoping he would snap out of whatever was the matter with him. He looked slowly at first just to test the water, finding that she was telling the truth. The blush was there, though it had removed itself from his face by a large percentage. "Come on, we should talk to her," Lynn suggested, tugging his hand to help pull him along, but only until they hit the hallway. Lynn went to the front door, stepping out with Lincoln following suit, the door closing behind them. "You wanted to say something," Lincoln reminded Ronnie Ann. She took a deep breath before starting. "I just want to say that I'm sorry for all that I've said about you," she told them, hoping that things would improve between the three of them. Lynn was a little surprised but unfazed by it all, considering she didn't hear a single word of the insults, nor did Lincoln tell her of what all was said. Ronnie Ann started to turn away, leaving them alone on the stoop before her attention was grabbed by Lynn. "Wait," she called after the single girl. Ronnie Ann turned, awaiting further words from the older girl. "Why don't you join us?" she proffered, trying to find a way to comfort her. She couldn't stand the idea that she had stolen Lincoln from her, no matter what or what he thought. "Thanks, but I've got other things to attend to." "I appreciate the offer," Ronnie Ann stated, remembering her manners, making the attempt at leaving once more. Lynn and Lincoln stood there, the latter stunned that his sister had tried to make good between them the way she did. He was emotionally torn in every direction, but was beginning to regain control over it all. They headed back inside, chaos in full swing. He saw that there was some time before he wanted to leave the house with his sister. The bathroom was open, giving him the time to get ready for his time out on the town. Luan was in her room, having observed all that was exchanged between her siblings and Ronnie Ann on the front step, remembering her encounters when she had asked Ronnie Ann to deliver the ultimate end prank last April Fool's Day. That was partly why she told Lynn to go to the restaurant that Lincoln started dating Ronnie Ann at. Still, the gears turned in her head, thinking of how she could make the two girls her marionettes, useful for tearing each other apart, leaving just Lincoln for her and her only. Luna was tending to her guitar in the garage, trying to find the one tune to bring her out of her misery, instead resorting to something from her favorite artist only to find that it made her even sadder. She had gone through Luan's videos, checking to see if her sister had something on her that was. What better left unsaid? Finding that Lynn had kissed her brother in its stead, she saw it and her heart blew into oblivion, the disappearance resembling that of cocaine up a junkie's nose. She held feelings for him, never letting anyone know of it at all. She simply bottled it up, tending to herself in the shower when the urge struck her. She had these feelings for him for well over a year, yet it tore her up spiritually. She was a God-fearing woman, yet she still held these feelings, leaving her to wonder if she should suppress them further or let the devil take hold of her. The very battle of questions that raged in her mind and heart left her unable to decide. This helped fuel her love of music, trying to make her forget her problems. She always felt so guilt-ridden after such a shower that she cranked her amps up to 11 in an effort to drown out her thoughts. She never did know who to turn to in order to find the solution to her problems, nor did she think she ever would. She plucked the last few notes of her song, choosing to switch genres. Maybe country would soothe her soul. Now she felt even more awful. Lincoln was prepared for the rest of the day's events. He saw that the clock in his room read noon, meaning he could hit someplace for lunch with Lynn on top of anything else. He grabbed Lynn before heading out the front door. "So where do you want to go?" he asked, having grabbed her hand as they began walking down the road. "I have an idea, but it's a surprise," she told him, waiting for the gratitude she would receive for taking him to a restaurant that would bring joy to her brother. He walked, not knowing of the place he would be enjoying, trying to deduce what it could be. They walked until they came into view of the eatery she had planned for. He saw it, thinking there might be some other place nearby, the realization hitting him as they stopped outside the very door she had been told would bring joy to him. He looked to her, glee across her face, worry on his. "You're sure you want to eat here?" he queried, dreading the response. "Well, I just thought that this would be a great place for a first date," she said, her optimism bright in her voice. It started to crack as she saw the look that was still on her brother's face. Is something wrong? He looked at her before making the choice to tell her. "It's just that this is where Ronnie and I had our first date," he gave blatantly, making the effort to be gentle in his choice of words. He dreaded saying it, but he didn't want to lie to his sister either. "Oh," she told him before an idea came to her. "What if we get it to go and eat at a park?" He looked at her, a smile finally touching his lips. "Yeah, that sounds pretty nice with that." They entered to grab their food. They went to a park, making sure it was one where he couldn't remember his breakup, enjoying what started off as an awful date, watching the sun move from east to west. He looked at her, knowing that she was ignorant of the fact that he had his first date with his ex-girlfriend at that food joint prior to his telling her. "It sure was good," he complimented, still looking at his sister. She agreed. "I wonder why Luan told me you would like eating there," she pondered. He merely looked at her, intrigued by what she had said. "Luan told you that," he said, incredulous to the idea. "Yeah, she said it would cheer you right up," Lynn remembered from their talk earlier that day. It didn't surprise Lincoln too much that Luan knew of that place, considering she had probably gotten a gig there. There was the possibility of her learning about it from Ronnie Ann, though he didn't want to think that his sister set him up to feel awful, or at least hold resentment towards Lynn. What he did seem to know is that his sisters loved to meddle, still leaving him stranded in the middle of nowhere. Still, he couldn't help but feel strings were being pulled by someone. He started to look around, seeing that there were a good few people at the park. Each was doing their own thing, whether it was playing at the playground or a jog through the area. Someone was paying close attention to their every move. From some distance off, Luan had her camera zoomed in on the two. She looked to see if anything was happening, such as him hating Lynn, or if there was going to be a bit of anything else to let her know that Lincoln was having an awful time. She trailed them, watching their every move. Yet as she kept peeking, she saw that Lincoln interlaced his hand with Lynn's. A burning rage began building up, only to be quelled when a rather witchy thought came forward she could get some evidence and blackmail Lynn. Yes, that's what she'd do. Some newfound energy from the idea crept into her, allowing her to keep filming. A glint came off of her braces, showing her position. She didn't notice, though, considering the way her eyes were placed in her head. Lincoln was still looking around, taking in the scenery, spotting the glint from where he was. He thought nothing of it, thinking it was a car from over in that direction. He turned back to Lynn, smiling slightly. "This was nice, thanks," he told her. She smiled back, having waited to see if he truly had a good time. "You're right, it was nice," she said before tacking on thanks for the good time. He told her no problem before turning his thoughts to something else. "You ever think that something isn't right?" he asked, trying not to ruin the mood, but he was unable to keep it out of mind, forcing it into the open. She began to think on what he said, a face of deep thought putting itself on. "Now that you mention it, I do guess that something odd is out and about," she replied, continuing almost as if there's some sort of plot against us. He nodded in agreement, still looking around. "Well, I think it's time we head back home," he opined, standing as he did so. She stood up, still holding his hand. They walked like so from the park, crossing through town to be back in their domicile. They kept an eye out for any family that might be out, making sure to drop their contact if they were spotted. No problem so far as they were a street away from their home. They were still unable to notice the stalker of a sister that was following them. They could hear Luna's music from where they were at, curious if any of their neighbors were deaf yet. They crossed the street, getting within 100 feet of the house before seeing the twins playing outside. They dropped contact, walking side by side. Lincoln spotted Lisa out there as well, scribbling on her notepad as she appeared to be observing the twins. He assumed she was done studying Lily, having moved on to the twins. Lynn went in, heading to her room. Lincoln was called over by Lana, wanting help with building a mud pie. He obliged, wanting to allow a few thoughts to swirl in his head while keeping his hands occupied. Lynn made it to her room, taking a load off on her bed. How'd it go? Lucy came from nowhere to see what went on during their date. "Jesus foo," Lucy, Lynn scolded, trying to set an example for all of those within earshot. "You've got to quit doing that." "Sorry, but seriously, how did it go?" she apologized. "I think it went well," she told her younger sister. She did think it went well, but she had a few questions about the whole thing. "Well, that's good," then Lucy commented, with almost undetectable levels of happiness in her tone. "Yeah, but," Lynn added, "I can't help but feel that something doesn't want us to be together." She sighed, putting her face in her hands. She kept them there, trying to allow herself to think on what it was that she was trying to figure out. Lincoln went into the house after having helped with building a mud pie. He decided that a shower might be the best thing to remove some of the mud that had accumulated on him. He came up to the bathroom door, knocking on it to see if anyone was on the other side occupying it. Nothing was the answer he received from the room. With this in mind, he opened it to find that an occupant was indeed inside. Luna was tending to her head in general, headphones blaring music that could be understood by her younger brother from 12 feet away. He could hear every note and chord, even the lyrics perfectly, as if he were wearing the headphones himself. Luna was naked, presumably fresh from a shower. Not even a towel was wrapped around her rather well-built and gorgeous frame. He simply couldn't move from the shock of seeing his older sister naked. She was finally done with some eyeshadow when she saw her brother in the mirror. He was so red in his face that Mars would have a difficult time comparing to it. She immediately stopped doing anything else, staring back at him in the mirror. She moved her headphones off, still locking eyes. He began to close the door, backing out of the room. She moved to throw her towel on, the embarrassment glued on as her only expression. She finished the rest of her routine, leaving the towel on and making sure her music was turned off. Luna left the room, hoping Lincoln didn't see much, if anything. She met Lincoln on the way out, making things even worse in terms of blushing between the two. He couldn't look her in the face, moving past her to take the room. She nearly legged it to her shared room, hoping that Luan wouldn't be there. After stepping in, she slammed the door behind her. She began checking around, trying to find the music device that she was using, only to realize it was still in the bathroom. Luna ran back, hearing the water running. She had two choices: wait for the room to be free to nab it, or dash in and dash out. She chose the latter of the two, unable to wait to finish the album she was listening to. She opened the door slowly, making sure the hinges wouldn't creak as she entered. All she had to do was grab it, and she saw his clothes on the floor. He was naked and in the shower. She started to realize this, letting it process in her mind. She looked toward the curtains, then looked back to the device. She was still in her towel. She started to think on it all. She had moved between the curtains and music, trying to make a decision. Well, just a peek then, she thought to herself. Luna approached the curtains, hand extended. Her fingers rested on the entrance of the curtains, ready to. She was shaking. She was there, ready to look in, having deviated from her original plan. She wasn't shaking from excitement. This is your brother, she chided herself mentally. Tears began to form in her eyes. The fuck is wrong with you? She continued berating herself. Tears had begun to roll. But what would Mom and Dad think? What would Lynn say? The next thought sealing it for her. What would God think? She moved from the curtains, heading to her device and grabbing it. She scurried out of the room, closing the door silently behind her. Luna made it back to her room, hoping no one bore witness to her entrance of the bathroom. She laid her head in her hands, tears hitting the floor. She hated herself for even thinking about it. She made sure to get dressed, unable to quit hating herself for what nearly transpired. She didn't want anyone else to know of her internal pain, preparing her guitar to drown out the sound of her shedding tears. At least she was alone, allowing her to blow eardrums to bits and pieces. Luan was skulking about the house, trying to make sure that she could find something strong enough to blackmail the lovers with. She had been in Lincoln's room, searching for good places to begin her surveillance, despite what she had in there when she spotted Luna heading into a Lincoln-occupied bathroom. Luan began filming, waiting for something to happen. Luna left the door open, creating the conditions that were primed for Luan. She witnessed Luna approach the curtains, appearing to make the attempt to open them before changing directions and leaving guilt on her sister's face. Luan made sure she was out of her sister's sight line as Luna came down the hallway. Luan continued with her thoughts. It certainly seems that I have some more competitors entering my arena. She turned to her camera, a grin settling upon her face. Let's just make sure we eliminate them, a laugh joining her last thought. She moved out of Lincoln's room before deciding she had a call to make to someone. She would make sure to remove any obstacles in her way to get to Lincoln. Lincoln came out of his shower, hearing the music blare from Luna's room. It seemed to be filled with self-hate and sadness, almost as if the artist had done something awful. He wanted to see if all was good with her, yet the thought of going deaf deterred him from it. He continued walking to his room, wondering if he should learn sign language in case he had to talk with his older sister and her hearing was damaged. Then his thoughts turned to Lynn, making him ponder if he could still date her, if he would ever hold feelings for her. Something told him he did have feelings, but another told him it was just in his head, that he would never know love again. The war didn't end, even when he finally turned in for the night. Chapter 4, Game of Louds. His alarm clock went off, telling him to join the land of the living. Lincoln smacked it, trying to end the awful sound. He was dreary-eyed, seeing double as his eyes took in the time. 5:30. He roused himself from his bed, a feeling of something different having laid its foundation in his mind. He remembered it was summer vacation. He knew he had turned off the alarm. Lincoln shuffled forth from his room. He checked Lynn's room, finding that no one was within it. He moved towards Lily and Lisa's room. Still, no one was on the other side. He went through each of his sister's rooms, greeting the lack of residents within them. Lincoln knew something wasn't right about the situation. He had checked all of the rooms that were to have occupants, save for his parents' room, and found not one soul. He heard the shower turn on, dreading whomever would be on the other side. He opened the door slowly, noticing that no one was in the open. Hello, he checked, ear ready to receive a reply. Silence. He inched toward the curtains of the shower, heart beating faster than he thought possible. He threw the curtains back, ill-prepared for the sight that he held before him. Lynn was laying in the tub, naked, milky-eyed, pale, a corpse. He didn't see blood or any other sign of how she died. He stopped breathing, forcing him to try to gasp for air. His ears were assaulted by laughter, unable to discern where it was coming from. He recognized it as Luan, with more and more voices joining the abomination that was his experience. He looked into the mirror, looking at how he himself was dying without air. Lincoln saw her body begin to move, sitting straight up. The body of his dead sister twisted itself to look at him, opening its mouth to speak. Wyatt asked him in a voice that was slightly warped, why the body started to crawl out. Why slowly it reached him, putting an arm on his left leg. He felt like passing out from the lack of oxygen. Wyatt begged, searching for an answer. Wyatt repeated in an endless loop. He could only hear the question come out of its mouth, joining the chorus of laughter. He passed out, still being assaulted by the words and voices. Lincoln's eyes shot open with him panting heavily. He felt like he had awoken from a dream in which he was falling, nearly hitting the ground before rousing. Adrenaline pumped through his veins, making damn sure he was unable to resume his sleep. He could see the vanguard of the sun rising through his window. The clock read 6. He managed to calm down, his heart rate returning to normal. He lay there, staring at the ceiling, his mind starting to glaze over with sleep. He didn't want Mr. Sandman to visit him once more, his eyes fighting against the impending sleep. The eyes glazed over, letting him sleep without really sleeping. Lincoln turned his head to see that it was 8:15. Might as well, he thought to himself, crawling out of bed. He moved like a zombie, such was his tiredness. He made it down to breakfast, finding that all of his sisters were enjoying the most important meal of the day. The adult table was packed with its normal attendance, forcing him to enjoy his breakfast at the kid table. He nearly ate his meal in the way a pig enjoys it. The lack of sleep played havoc, forcing him to shovel his food before he made his face enjoy some. Lynn sat at the adult table, nearly done with her meal. She occasionally peeked at Luan from her spot, seeing each time that her sister was holding a grin. Neither spoke to the other after Lynn's date, leaving silence to fill the void in their voices' stead. Luna seemed to be a wreck for some reason. From what Lynn could tell, it was like she had committed murder or was freaking out after not using some rubbers. It all seemed peculiar to her, seeing that only 3 of the total sisters were the odd ones out this fine morning. Luan finished prior to Lynn, taking her dishes to the sink. She left a moment later, scurrying to her room. Lynn hurried with the remainder of her breakfast, legging it so that she could talk to Luan without much worry of Luna overhearing anything. She made it to the stairs, trying to hurry before she saw Luan leaving with some of her comedy gear. Damn it, she has to be somewhere, Lynn silently cursed in her mind. She had one chance, and now the next one was going to take forever to appear. Luan just moved past her, an air of smugness trailing behind. The smile seemed to have changed into one of victory. Lynn, now having lost her chance of getting an explanation, moved to the room she slept in. She might as well try to finish starting the day, preparing for all it had in store for her. Luna barely finished her breakfast, moving to start on the dishes. She looked into the kitchen, spotting Lincoln. Her heart dropped ever so much further from its place. She couldn't even look at him without fear and self-hate hitting her system. She just played the events in the bathroom over and over and over in her mind, unable to believe what she almost did. But she had to do the dishes. It was her turn. An internal struggle of power began over whether or not she could keep further tears from flowing in the open, right in front of her family, right in front of Lincoln. Her legs moved, but not of their own volition. Leaded feelings were making her feel heavy from it all, like she would fall through the floor of their house. Luna still pressed onward, hoping her brother would simply ignore her. He didn't look up from the now empty bowl, focusing on the bottom with a stoner's gaze. She ran the water, prepping the dishes. He walked up and left his bowl right next to the sink, muttering a thanks before wandering off. His voice alone mauled her heartstrings, making her battle that much worse. Lincoln went back up, trying to see if he could get some more sleep in for the day. He lay back in bed, the thought and feeling of sleep settling in. Just the thought and feeling. No sleep chose to attack, leaving a state of peace without rest upon him. He lay there watching the ceiling, waiting for slumber to truly come. Nothing. He did see that time had passed while he waited. The clock read 9:26. With a sigh, he crawled back out. Nothing wanted to go his way today, it seemed. He left, seeing if he could occupy himself with a little TV. He arrived, spotting Lori enjoying a show. Well, enjoy is a bit too loose here. More like she was enjoying her phone, what with her face and hands glued to its bright little screen. He knew better than to take that as a sign he could change the channel. No, the death penalty wasn't for him. She did seem to be happier, possibly due to being back together with Bobby again. He sighed, choosing to soak in the sun rather than become a human pretzel. He went through the front door and sat on the steps, hearing Luna play in the garage. With nothing better to do, he set for where the music was coming from. Lincoln peeked in through the open garage door, spotting his sister strumming some sort of song. Luna didn't bother to sing along with the notes she was churning out. Instead, Misery was her company, standing by and providing her an audience. Lincoln didn't make his presence known, having chosen instead to watch his older sister play something depressing. His ears were amazed at the level of self-hatred that was cranked out. He stared, frozen. She finally stopped playing, having plucked the last note. Her face disappeared into her palms, forcing her brother out of his place of witness. Luna was too busy wallowing to notice him approaching her, allowing for him to perform a sneak attack with a hug. She stopped shedding tears, barely able to process it all. He wrapped his arms around her, making an effort to comfort her. The exact opposite was achieved when he began his embrace. She cried even harder, the guilt driving ever farther into her heart. He waited for the tears to stop, hoping it wouldn't be long. Time passed at an unknown rate, what with the lack of devices to tell time in the garage. "What's wrong?" he finally asked, patience running low. She finally looked at him, eyes beyond obliterated. Whatever makeup was on was now running down her face. She couldn't just tell him that she was in the bathroom, ready to take a peep at his manhood whilst he showered the day before. She couldn't tell him that she loved him. No, she couldn't tell him a thing. She chose her next best option. "I don't want to talk about it," she told him, trying to keep him from learning her secret. And just why not, he pried, trying to use any and all tactics he could think of to see if she was in need of his help. "Because I feel awful enough just having experienced it. I don't want to open that wound again," she reasoned, hoping he would be satisfied in his quest for knowing of her pain's cause. No dice. "Luna, whatever it is, I want to help," he said, adding, "so you can tell me or I'll follow you until I get my answer." She thought over his words, afraid of what would happen should he find her secret. A thought came to mind, letting her flesh it into a lie. Better this than that, she told herself. "I got heckled at my last performance," she lied, trying to throw him off the trail of her true reasons. He seemed hurt that someone would dare to harm what confidence she held as a performer. "I think your music's pretty good," he complimented, hoping that it would bring her spirits up. She looked at his face, eyeing a smile rooted to his lips. This did bring her spirits up, if only marginally. Having seen her brighten up, he started to change directions from where the conversation was currently at. "Say, Luna, can I ask you something?" She looked at him with caution driving into her mind. "Sure," Link she granted, praying that it wouldn't involve her and her feelings in some way. I keep having these nightmares that I don't know how to handle," he started, removing contact from his sister. "I keep worrying that they might be telling me something and I don't know how to stop them or do anything else with them." Luna was caught unawares at the admission. "What are your nightmares about?" she wondered, hoping it wasn't something involving her. He marched onwards, only ever hesitating in the slightest. They involve Lynn and her dying," but he trailed off before, resuming, "I keep seeing her die or having already died, and there doesn't seem to be any way to stop her death." He felt awful for his admission, but he needed someone to talk to, and he couldn't talk with his girlfriend. At least not without being told to not worry about it. Luna seemed to be stunned, stuck at an utter loss for words. "And what goes on in these awful excuses for dreams?" she asked, praying that she wasn't the cause for it all. The night before, I saw he paused, not wanting to reveal his ex-girlfriend as the culprit, fibbing just a little. Some shadow drowned her, leaving me to watch as I was tied to a chair. Luna thought back to that morning, having heard him scream from his room. She was paying attention, waiting for him to start back up. Then last night I dreamed that I found Lynn dead in the shower, just as if she were killed by something that didn't leave a mark. He seemed to be afraid, having opened up his fresh set of fears. Luna watched as he began to have fear spread across his face. "I better go," he said suddenly before leaving. She was too stunned to really stop him, let alone seek further information. She wanted to know why Lynn was being killed, but that would weigh ever more on her mind. She turned her focus back to the instrument she was using and stared at it as she pondered all of her life's choices. Ronnie Ann was in her room, debating a fierce battle of whether she should make any movements in the fragile ecosystem she had become a part of. She looked back to the call that Luan made to her the night before. The comedian called, having a proposition for the grief-stricken girl. Ronnie Ann listened to all that was offered, hearing her out, but with no promises being made. Her thoughts delved to a level of darkness she never thought possible. If I help Luan, then there's the chance that I can show Lincoln how stupid his decision was, she thought, the idea of vengeance cropping up. Even so, what good would that do? We're never going to be back together, she countered, reasoning so as to keep from making an atrocious move. A sigh escaped her lips. Should I warn Lincoln? The battle kept raging, tearing her apart repeatedly. She did say that she would share him, but I can't do something so depraved and heartless against Lincoln. The thought circulated, letting her absorb it in its entirety. Why am I considering this? Luan returned from her job, having entertained some kid for his birthday. It allowed her to plot further, even though the party was meant to be quite lively. She walked through the door, still dressed as a clown, a prop in one of her hands. The smile that was still rooted to her lips held properties that would make anyone fearful of her, should they bother to examine it thoroughly. Lincoln being all hers was reason enough to own such a smile. The steps were barely behind her when Lynn approached. The door opened and both stepped into the vacant room. Luan sat in front of her mirror, taking off all of her costume. "Hey, Lynn," she greeted, playing dumb to what Lynn was there for. "Hi, Luan," Lynn replied, a touch of anger in her voice. "So we went to that restaurant you suggested." "Was it pleasant?" she said, still playing dumb. "The food was, but we had to take it to go," she gave, the anger creeping in just a hint more. "And why was that?" Luan continued with her feint of lack of knowledge. "Oh, I don't know. Probably because Lincoln had his first date with Ronnie Ann there," Lynn continued, fury now apparent in her voice. Luan finished the last of her makeup removal. "Really?" Luan played, just barely showing her hand in the poker game that was their exchange. Lynn seemed to boil at the tone of voice that was being used. "Yeah, and I can't help but feel you knew that beforehand," Lynn skewered, trying her hardest to keep as few people out of the loop of their exchange as possible. Luan just smirked. "And so what if I did?" She continued to keep leaving her replies to Lynn in the form of questions. Lynn was livid with the direction of the conversation and the one steering it that way. Why Lynn sought. "That's for me to know, and you to never find out," was all that Luan delivered. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some business to attend to with that." Luan left, the Machiavellian smile present on her lips. Her younger sister stood there, both dumbfounded and full of rage. She knew Luan was pulling the strings behind it all, yet what proof did she have? She couldn't tell her parents about it for numerous reasons. Lincoln was out of the question since she didn't want to put anything on his plate. She was stuck between a rock and a hard place. All she had for options was to simply play Luan's game and hope she won. Lincoln worried that he had said too much to his sister, wondering if Lynn would kill him for what he had said. The panic that was hitting him came from many directions, forcing him into each to follow the panic. Suddenly it dawned on him. He started to think about why his older sister was crying. He knew that a heckler couldn't do that to her. No, he never heard anyone do such a thing to his sister, or if they did, she brushed it off as some sleazebag without a gram of talent. He continued in his line of thought, trying to reach the end of it. A hypothesis was suddenly forming. What if she was crying because? That was as far as he could get. Luna came back to her shared room, her tears having stopped for a while now. She felt a little better with the knowledge that her brother was so kind and sweet, trying to find her problem so he could fix it. She felt a bit worse at that, yet she changed from that thought to something of chiding herself, albeit for a semi-separate reason. Why couldn't you just say that it was your time of the month? She yelled in her mind. That would have gotten him to leave, or at least not try to comfort her. Nothing can change the past, and she knew it. She had brought her guitar in, ready to sit down and inspect it for maintenance. She pulled out some special tools, wishing that something would go right for her today. The call for dinner reached across the house, summoning everyone to attend. She set all of her stuff down, leaving it to be taken care of when she got back. Luna sat at the adult table, playing her part in the tense and weird atmosphere. She could see Lynn staring at her younger sister from across the table, almost as if she was trying to impale Luan with her gaze. The wrath could be felt dripping off of her. She chanced a peek at Luan from the left side of her vision, who seemed to be creating a smug air about her. Luna was able to tell that her depression added to it all. The loud parents thought it best to see what all was happening to warrant such an air at the table. So began their mother. What did you girls do today? She shifted her focus over to Lori. Lori, I remember US telling you about no phones at the table. Lori was glued to her screen, only peering up when she heard talk about phones. But Bobby, she tried. Bobby can wait, her father stated sternly. Lori sent one last text, turning the phone off since she couldn't trust herself with not touching it. Shall we try again? Their mother rhetorically asked. Well, I started looking into various colleges, she told her parents. After having graduated, she wanted to further her education, but the caveat to it all was that Bobby had to be nearby. That's good, their father commented. Leni, what about you? I tried looking for some place called Nowhere, but I can't find it anywhere, she claimed, sounding defeated. The rest of her family thought it would take a miracle for her to graduate. Okay, how about you, Luna? Their mother directed. Luna was completely stumped for what to say before a lie came to the tip of her tongue. What choice did she have in the grand scheme of things? I got booked someplace, she said, knowing that it was far from the truth. Good for you, honey, their mother complimented. Luan, I had to perform for a party, she said nonchalantly. This was true, but the rest of her day was completely left untouched. How about you, Lynn? Their father queried. I was practicing, she said, her teeth nearly grinding. This was partly true considering she was practicing to get information from Luan. Things were different at the kid table. Lisa was still studying the twins, yet the study itself was eluding Lincoln's mind. He did want to know what she was looking for, but the interest he had in it was quite minimal. He focused on trying to find the answer to all that was torturing him. Whether it was Luna's depression, Luan's, whatever, and Lynn's love, he had no real answers. Maybe tonight he would get whatever he needed to seek the truth of it all. Dinner ended rather quickly, allowing everyone to do their own things before bed. Luna returned to her guitar, starting her efforts of maintenance all over again. Luan came in, seating herself on a beanbag with some sort of book. Luna figured it was some sort of novel relating to comedy, not bothering to pay attention. So what were you doing looking through my tapes? Luan grilled, not moving her eyes from the book. Luna made a face before it hit her, realizing what she was talking about. I wasn't looking through your tapes, she denied, praying Luan wouldn't go any further. Well, you see, Luan continued, still staring at the book. It's just that I saw some tapes were moved around and that I also have the tape of you looking through them. Luna paused in her work. Shit, she cursed. She didn't want Luan to continue. Why do you bring it up? You see, I also saw you watch a particular tape Luan let sink in, allowing Luna to feel the full weight of what was to come, and you seem to have changed since watching it. Fuck, Luna panicked. Which tape was it, Luna? She asked with some level of fake interest, ennui adorning her voice. Luna felt her throat become cotton, barely able to breathe, let alone talk. Luan didn't enjoy waiting, instead choosing to finish for her. Was it the one where Lincoln and Lynn kissed Luna was losing her cool, opting for damage control? So what if it was she told her defiantly? Luan just stared at her book. You love him too, don't you? Luan interrogated. Victory was tainting her voice. She chose to look up from the item she was reading. Luna was blushing, trying and failing to hide it, her hatred for herself expanding. A Cheshire smile grew for Luan. That's okay, she said, returning her attention to her book. Luna was horrendously worried, becoming mortified on top of it all. Well, she searched for the proper words to fit the situation she had found herself in. That's quite all right, Luan told her sister. Luna seemed a bit confused. Just make sure you don't get in my way. Something was off about that sentence. But Luna wondered. Luan was still keeping her Cheshire Machiavellian hybrid of a grin. I simply said to make sure you don't get in my way, she responded, turning the page as she did so. And what are you going to do if I ignore you? Luna challenged, trying to make any semblance of sense of it all. Well, I was simply going to leave you alone, but now I think you'll work better under me, Luan opined, vicious thoughts circling in her head. How are you going to do that? How Luna challenged. She set everything down, save for her guitar, leaving it across her lap. It's very simple. I'll show Lincoln everything about you and your feelings for our only brother, she threatened, still keeping a cheery tone. Screw you, I'm going to tell Lincoln about this, Luna warned, moving her guitar to the side, leaving the bed. She barely held the doorknob when Luan spoke. I failed to mention that Mom and Dad will be shown this evidence as well, she foretold, still having not looked up from her book. I think our whole family would enjoy being shown what you tried to do in the bathroom to Lincoln. Luna was pale, rivaling Lucy in color. Her hand was on the doorknob, ready to turn to let her out. She relinquished her grip. That's a good girl. Lucy was in the vents, observing the exchange. She saw it all, even heard it all. Lucy had to get to Lynn with what was going on. There wasn't a snowball's chance in hell that she would allow unprecedented evil like this to run rampant. Chapter 5, A House Divided. Lucy tossed and turned in her bed, nearly throwing everything on it to the floor along with herself. She saw and heard all that was more terrifying to her than she would ever admit, let alone have anyone know of. Luan was plotting against Lynn, dragging Luna into the very pit she had become a part of. But the true horror of it all was that Lucy was unable to warn Lynn without attracting the ire of her older sister. Thus was her dilemma: to give the information to her older roommate and hope nothing bad happened, or to wait for the right time to give the information, hoping nothing awful happened in the meantime. She wondered how Lynn was able to sleep with her turning so. Maybe she had taken enough hits to her head to leave some shred of brain damage that was housed permanently in her skull, allowing for the blissful ignorance of the world outside her dream realms. It felt odd for her to feel such terror, granted that she was always stuck in a dark and scary world of her own, nothing providing so much as a speck of dread. Yet here she was, fearing the very day as her sisters were losing themselves to whatever fueled their desires. She stayed in her ever-changing state of awareness, the passage of time unwavering. Lynn rose from her peace, stretching to allow for a better awakening. She saw Lucy looking a tad worse for wear than she usually did. It made her wonder pointlessly, seeing as how her sister had disappeared in record time when she blinked. Time for a decent meal, she told herself mentally, jumping down to join her family for breakfast. She passed down the steps, checking if Luan was going to push her in some attempt to be petty. She still didn't understand a damn thing about her motives, leading to further contempt for Luan. The table revealed no further evidence for her answer, nor did it seem that it would do so. She simply watched her sister enjoy some sort of tiny victory, unsure of what it was about. Lucy knew what it was about. She knew every detail concerning her older sister's victory. What stopped her was that Luan had eyes everywhere. The walls were her ears, the air her web. Although Lucy was able to effectively dodge most of Luan's surveillance, she had been caught a few times, remembering Lincoln's video to further her point and thoughts. She managed to learn how to avoid the system ever so much further, but paranoia was stuck in her head. Whether it was healthy or otherwise was beyond her. No matter the answer, it would always feel unhealthy. Lincoln didn't bother observing Lucy in her internal war. He ate his breakfast, musing at the idea of something being off in his family. He knew something wasn't right, barring the relationship he had with his older sister. His fingers ran through his hair, aiding in his thinking. He had those dreams, leaving a rather vivid imprint, despite his knowing they were just dreams. Lincoln dropped his spoon, abandoning it in the bowl of cereal he had emptied. His dreams from last night seemed empty, yet the sinister overtones were present. He called it quits, standing to rid himself of his tableware. Lucy followed suit, trying to leave things as mere coincidence with their trip. She saw him make his way upstairs, trying her best to create a fast pace without creating the look of her trying to follow him. She caught him, succeeding at her task. "Hey, Lincoln," she called, putting her plan into action. He turned, the light glaze of his inner machinations disappearing from his eyes. "What do you need?" he signaled, hoping it was something trifling. "I just needed you to check out some of my poems," she lied, hoping that he would buy it. He did. All right, he agreed, praying that it would allow him to rest his weary head and try to figure out his problems. He even began thinking about all of his life's decisions that led up to his time within the here and now. Right this way she ushered, praying that the odds would fall into her favor with her plan. He moved into her shared room, Lynn still at the adult table. She handed him the book she kept, filled with her thoughts and writings. Lucy made sure that the proper page was selected for his viewing pleasure. His eyes were greeted with the following: "Don't say a word. We're being watched, and you need to keep acting like you're reading my poems. I have your favorite Ace-savvy comic. I'll explain everything later. Meet me at the tree in the backyard if you want it, and answers just before noon. And back the book and pretend like you just read a poem from me." Lincoln was beyond stunned. He could feel his very heart nearly beat out of his chest as he read the lines. Rage built, replacing itself with fear, ceaselessly cannibalizing each other. She had his favorite comic hostage, the thought foreign in his mind. He couldn't risk it being hurt in any way, shape, or form. What choice did he have? He followed the instructions to a T, keeping the best poker face he could muster. "That was a really good poem, Lucy," he fibbed, playing her little game. There was no true malice behind it all, quite the opposite, in fact. Yet he knew none of what marched through her head. He knew not of the gears spinning, the hands cranking them. Lucy knew, in spite of how little it was, the conspiracy of anguish for her brother and sisters was enough to rally her against the conspirator. But Lincoln was meant to be out of the loop for the time being. He was still reeling from the revelation of her words, desperately piecing the little information available together. He played it cool until he entered his room, dropping whatever act he had when he walked into his sanctuary. He still kept it bottled from his mouth, debating and wrestling with his inner struggles on the inside. Lynn marched into her shared room not too long after her boyfriend left, missing all the action. Lucy had finished preparing for her plan for her older sister. "Lynn, could you read this, please?" Lucy begged, marking her page. Why, Lynn nearly snapped, unintentionally coming off with the wrong tone due to the wrath that fueled her waking moments. "I just wanted your opinion on some of my latest work," she fibbed, making an effort to not sound hurt. She just wanted to keep her older sister safe and tried to take into account what might be bothering Lynn so. "All right," Lynn agreed, making the effort to rectify what wrong she may have committed. She grabbed the book, reading the marked page. Her eyes met the very words Lucy intended. Not a word out loud. "Meet me by the backyard tree in 30 minutes. Urgent. Anyone asks, say you're practicing. Hand this back and say it was good. Lucy disliked the idea of forcing her siblings into lying or playing along with her games. It made her feel like she loathed the name. Even if it was well intended, it was still the same as Luan pulling Luna's strings, turning her very sister into her own Mr. Coconuts, minus the one she owned prior. Lynn read it, left wanting at what would make her sister demand such from her. She played along, wishing for it to be related to Luan. It was nice Lucy lied. It felt bad coming off the tongue, even if it was harmless. Lying was something she avoided, what with her beliefs and how she was raised. Irony began striking home for her. Lucy played it off, keeping up appearances for Big Sister. She promptly left, choosing to wait at the tree so as to stagger their meet in an attempt at keeping Luan in the dark. She did make the conscious decision to grab a towel from the bathroom, but somebody was occupying it, forcing her to head straight for the tree in the backyard. She would still wait there, even if it meant sitting in the dew. Luna still sat at the table, unaware of the lack of people around her. Luan was there, slowly eating the last bits of her breakfast. This did nothing to console Luna, seeing how Luan was her puppeteer. She still hated her life, the reasons multitudinous. Her love for Lincoln was her ultimate downfall. If only. The very idea played on an endless loop. If only she had shown these feelings earlier, maybe things would have worked out better. If only she had waited for Lincoln to finish his shower, then she would have been clear of this mess. If only. Yet here she was, Luan's new dummy, ready to do her master's bidding. Fury was her companion, depression her friend, and anguish her company. Misery, when all of these items were combined, was the very thing she felt. She began plotting, planning to bring Luan down with minimal risk and maximum reward. Nothing presented itself, allowing scenarios of her fall from grace if she brought Luan with her. Luna wasn't the type to aim for a Pyrrhic victory, but if worse came to pass, it unsettled her. She had time, all the time in the world, to rid herself of the shackles she was forced to wear. Luan was finished with her breakfast, going through separate plans for her offensive against all that stood between her and Lincoln. Ronnie Ann was out of the way for the time being, Luna being at her beck and call. Only Lynn seemed to be left. If reading her book on statecraft had taught her anything, it was to be prepared for a new opponent to arise. She knew the current teams, but she feared any new players that would come from nowhere. The list was shortening the more she thought, leaving only one name that could bring her to ruin Lucy. A smirk crossed onto her lips at the notion of her younger sister being able to overthrow her. All she had to do was keep an eye on her and all would be right with the world. If Lucy started to become too powerful, then she would demolish her, raising her with a mighty storm of hellfire. She grew weary of sitting at the table, moving to clear her dishes. It was her turn today if memory served. Ronnie Ann made a choice at long last. With all the debating and fighting within her, she finally made a choice in the war over Lincoln. She shuffled to get ready for the day, trudging along with each step of her routine. No one was home, her family having left for all of their jobs. Bobby still held his job as a limo driver, miraculously enough, since he was constantly working new jobs. Lynn met with Lucy outside just as she requested. It was a most queer request, given all that she had known of her sister. The words that were written in Lucy's hand seemed to be enough to startle Lynn, something she never thought possible. "You wanted to speak with me?" Lynn asked, having arrived at the spot she was told to head to. "Keep your voice down and face away from the house," Lucy commanded. Lynn was confused but obeyed nonetheless. "I called you here because your life might be in danger," she revealed. Lynn lost her breath, barely able to form some coherence of words. "What?" "I said someone might be out to get you," she repeated, worry having clung to her monotonous voice. The disbelief still rang through Lynn. "And who would be willing to take me on?" she replied, forcing faux bravado into her tone. "Luan's the one foolish enough to take you on," Lynn recoiled internally. The proof was there, but it wasn't condemning enough. How so and why? Lynn delved, trying to make sense of what was being thrown at her. I was in the air vents last night and she paused, searching for the right words. I overheard Luan while she was talking to Luna. It seems that Luan is in love with Lincoln, along with Lynn's heart skipped a beat. The severity of the situation was easily detected in Lucy's voice. Right now, Luna is under her control because of video evidence. If this is true, then you better be careful when taking her on. Lynn felt like she would suffer a heart attack. Luna and Luan were in love with her boyfriend. Luna was also being manipulated because of video evidence. What about her? What if the same were true for her as with Luna with a video? Lynn had to find that video. She had to recover it and leave no trace of its footage behind. The large question of how remained. How could she keep herself safe from suffering the same fate as her older sister? Never mind that, how could she use this against Luan? Maybe something else would present itself. Lucy, what do you think is the best approach to it all? She queried. Her sister seemed stumped when an idea came about. You have to sleep with Lincoln. Lynn was rather surprised. It seemed to come up as a fantasy once in a while, but to actually go through with it. Was this the tactical edge she was looking for? No matter where she started in her quest for a different line of attack, it always led to the same conclusion: she had to sleep with Lincoln. Luan would be furious, leading to mistakes in her planning. The moral dilemma rose when she thought more about it. Would sleeping with him just to mess with Luan be good for their love? She would use him like some pawn, becoming just as bad as the one she sought to bring down. This was going to need some time. Luan was washing the dishes, humming to herself as more plans went through her brain. Luna was still within earshot, waiting in the way a dog waits for its master. Luan then stumbled upon something she rather enjoyed. Luna, she beckoned, summoning her older sister to the sink. Yes, Luna replied. Any chance you could soundproof the basement? She inquired, a sly grin forming. I guess, but it might take a good few hours. Why? She responded, her want of knowledge somewhat insatiable. I just want the room soundproof. That's all Luan gave, leaving her intentions very well hidden. Luna still sat uneasy with all of her affairs in their current state, yet a plan of her own came to mind. She very well doubted that Luan was able to tell if her room was well proofed against sound, letting her take advantage and root her out to the family. Whatever the cost was, it would be much lighter in the long run when compared to the allowance of her sister's continual reign. She grinned in her head before traveling to do as she was instructed. The passage of time ticked, letting Lincoln become aware of when he had to meet Lucy. He could only pray that his comic was still okay. He even spent time looking for it just to check if she was telling the truth on the matter. She had. Now it was the moment of truth. He went to where she told him to meet her, fear filling his very being. Thanks for meeting me. Now keep your face from the house and your voice low, she instructed, telling him what she told Lynn at their meeting. What do you want, Lucy? He asked, anxiety bathing him. It's simple. You and Lynn appear to be in danger, she dropped rather bluntly. He was left speechless, standing in wonderment at her words hitting his ears. And the way I know is I overheard Luan threatening Luna. She seems to be in love with you, almost as if it's an obsession. He hardly believed it. He felt as if Lynn had confessed her love all over again. He didn't know how to handle it, whether he should simply confront his older sister or if he should go on some sort of witch hunt. He could smell the sulfur in the air. How in danger is Lynn? He finally spurted after struggling for the right words. Lucy looked at the ground before her gaze returned to his general direction. I think it's massive, yet I can't rightly say what Luan has in store for her should she take some sort of revenge, but her life might be at risk. Lucy stood from the ground before leaving one last thing in his hands. Whatever happens, don't blame Luna. She seems to be a pawn, forced to do Luan's bidding. Also, your comic is under my pillow, completely unharmed. He was glad to know his comic was all right, but stressed out after knowing that someone in his family was in deep danger, with another member of his large family causing the danger. What fresh hell had he entered? Luna finished her job in the basement, carefully setting things up so as to hoodwink Luan about her intent. She felt a nagging bit of her try to force her into making sure no one could get hurt and suppressed it, thinking over and over how if someone was to be hurt, then she wouldn't be at fault, seeing how any noise would reach the family. It was a price to pay, but then again, so was actually doing the job in full. She left the room satisfied with how she was able to remove Luan from her position of tyranny with as little damage to her and anyone else her sister hurt along the way. Lincoln entered into Lynn's room after a quick rap without giving time for a response, feeling the need to talk with her about the danger they faced. He saw that she was laying in her bed, staring at the ceiling. She had been mulling over what Lucy told her, still finding no alternatives. They either went nowhere or left her in a corner, stuck at the mercy of Luan. Lynn, he called. She snapped out of her private world, intrigued to find him in her room. Need something, she obliged in response. I think it might be better to take a walk and talk for what I have to say, he stumbled, Lucy's words clanging in his mind. Same, she said before jumping down from her bed. He was puzzled at her choice of words, brushing it aside while he prepared for his talk. They left the house, ready to take on their verbal adventure. Hesitance had never left each of their heads nor their tones. I just think that we need to be more careful around Luan, he concluded to his explanation of all that was beknownst to him. Lynn listened and gifted her own notes on the subject, each hoping that Luan wasn't bothering to stalk them. They were constantly searching around them, paranoid of every person and place they passed by. Even if we're more careful, she won't stop her pursuit of us, Lynn countered. I feel like we should go to her directly and fix the problem ourselves. He shook his head at this point she was taking an effort to make. So how do we get the evidence to build against her? He started his reason. She holds a lot of power so long as she wields those tapes. In what way do we have a chance to be rid of her? She looked away, figuring out the solution to his proposed problem. He kept going. Then, on top of that, how do we proceed with weeding her out? We can't tell Mom and Dad because we'd have to risk exposing our relationship to them, let alone recruit our sisters to aid us for a variety of reasons. How do we stop her without running any risks? Lynn moved her mouth over to his right ear. The only way I can think of to get rid of her is she fumbled, not wanting to risk any chance of turning him away from her, is to sleep together. The words, awkward as they felt exiting her mouth, struck their own personal chords with him. She moved from his ear, spotting the blush that accompanied his expression. She felt one hit her as well. He looked away, hiding with failure to succeed. His eyes were wide. He considered this to occur at some point in the future, not able to entertain the idea for the thought of even less than a week from their moment in time. Why do you suppose that he forced with a lump forming in his throat? Because it'll force her hand, letting her show her true colors to our family, she replied. He seemed to buy it. All right, well, I guess if it keeps you from getting hurt, then whatever it takes, he told her in earnest. He grabbed her hand and they walked a little more, not wishing to return home quite yet. Ronnie Ann rang the doorbell, her heart beating steadily faster. She started to worry if her choice was wrong or if she should leave well enough alone. Luna answered the door, surprised at the young girl standing before her and surprising Ronnie Ann as well. Can I help you? Luna inquired courteously. Aye, is Lincoln home? She stuttered, the shock quickly wearing off. Luna turned around before shouting, Oi, is Lincoln here? The sisters gave replies that added up to a simple no. Luna turned her focus back to the guest. Doesn't seem like it? Why? Oh, Ronnie Ann sounded disappointed at her news. I just wanted to talk with him real quick. Any idea when he'll be back? Luna shook her head, leading to further disappointment for Ronnie Ann. If you want, I can tell him what you wanted to say, Luna proffered. The younger girl shook her head at the offer, politely turning it down. I think it best if I kept it between him and I, she reasoned. She gave a polite departure, turning herself to head home. Luna shrugged before closing the door, still praying on the inside for a swift end to Luan's terror. God damn it, Ronnie Ann silently cursed to herself. I try and help him out and he isn't even home. Ark. Why is it that when, damn it, she was unable to think clearly, such was her frustration? She chose his side, wanting to keep him safe from his sister, even if it meant she was helping his new girlfriend. She could deal with that later and in a more humane way. Not too long after Ronnie Ann left, the young couple arrived home. They had been talking it over about how they would make it seem convincing to their family that she could do as Lucy suggested in a manner that created the right circumstances. Unable to agree on anything, Lynn simply thought it best to sneak into his room after everyone went to bed. He hated it, but what other option was there? All that was left to do now was wait for night to fall. They went their separate ways, tending to other parts of the house. Luan tended to her film archive, dusting and checking if all was where it should be. She went through the ones she had hidden for blackmail purposes, seeing them all in their rightful place. Oh, how fun it was to be so powerful. Her opponents were in some form of disarray, her path to Lincoln nearly clear. How could she not enjoy herself? Luna walked in after Luan was finished with her job. "Is the basement suitable?" the younger sister interrogated. "Yes, it should be up to snuff," she replied with slight hesitation. Luan didn't notice. "Good, you've done your job, so I guess I can reward you," she informed her. Luna felt a lump in her throat. She knew what she had done to sabotage her younger sister, but she didn't know if her sister knew. Luna forced a poker face, wishing for something pleasant. "I do believe that you can have the first taste of Lincoln's love juices," she finished with a smile. Time froze. Everything started to break down in her world. All known laws of physics stopped working. Anything that was instantly became non-Euclidean. What was all she could process? Had Luan really said as she heard? No way. It just couldn't simply exist in any possible way, whether in this universe or an alternate one. What was Luan thinking? Surely there was some sort of catch to it, all right? With all she had gathered in her time with Luan, there was more to this picture. Time began to rouse from its standstill. She had to act fast. "Thank you, Luan," she gratefully acted. She was honored to be the first, but it was something she didn't want because it was presented to her rather. She wanted it more because Lynn was no longer with Lincoln, or even with the express permission from Lynn, something she doubted to ever happen. Despite all of the events surrounding her, she still didn't want it due to her faith. Still, she had to put on a mask for her puppeteer. Soon, she thought to herself. Soon.